The night was quiet and cold, the kind of night where the wind moved slowly through the trees and the stars looked brighter than usual. Deep in the countryside stood an old wooden cabin at the edge of a thick forest. Its windows dark, its roof slightly bent from years of rain and sun. For most people it was just an old building, forgotten and unwanted. But for one man, it was more than just wood and nails, it was a memory. A part of his life that he could never let go of. The cabin had belonged to his father, a quiet man who built it with his own hands, every nail hammered with care, every plank cut with purpose. The man, now grown and living in the city, would visit sometimes, spending weekends fixing broken things or sitting by the fire remembering his childhood. It was his escape, his peace, his private world far from the noise of life. Across the fence, however, lived a different kind of people. His neighbors were a loud, arrogant family who moved in 5 years ago and never learned respect. They laughed at everything that wasn't theirs. They mocked everyone who didn't fit their idea of fun, and they especially loved mocking him. They called him the ghost man or the hermit, making jokes about his quiet ways and his old cabin. Every time he came to visit, they'd shout across the yard, "Hey old man, still fixing that pile of wood?" He never replied, just smiled and waved. His calmness made them uneasy. They didn't understand how someone could be silent when insulted. To them, silence was weakness, and weakness was something they loved to exploit. That night was no different. It was a Saturday. Music echoed from their backyard as they laughed, drank, and shouted. The sound of bottles clinking carried through the cool air. The man sat on the porch of his cabin, sipping coffee, watching the smoke from their bonfire rise high into the sky. He wasn't angry, not yet, but a quiet unease sat in his chest. His father used to say, "When fools run out of laughter, they look for something to break." He didn't know how true those words would soon become. Near midnight, as the stars shimmered over the trees, the neighbors' laughter turned wild. He could hear them arguing about something, and then someone shouted, "I bet you wouldn't dare light that creepy cabin up." Followed by more laughter, another voice yelled, "Why not? It's empty anyway." The man frowned, setting down his cup. The words floated through the air like poison. The smell of alcohol and smoke mixed as they stumbled closer to the fence. Hidden behind bushes, they carried a red gasoline can, whispering and giggling like children about to play a cruel prank. One of them poured the liquid near the cabin wall. The other struck a lighter, "Just one spark," he said, grinning. The flame caught the fumes instantly. The fire spread like a hungry beast, climbing the wooden walls faster than they expected. For a second, they stared in silence, eyes wide at the sight of the orange glow lighting up the forest. Then they laughed again, louder, almost hysterical. It worked. Look at it burn. The fire grew, licking the roof, snapping wood apart, smoke rising thick and black. Somewhere deep in the forest, an owl screamed as the heat rolled through the air. They backed away, watching the cabin crumble. "Let's go," one of them said nervously, "before someone sees." They ran back toward their yard, tossing the can behind a tree, leaving the fire to devour the rest. When the man's car headlights appeared down the dirt road minutes later, the cabin was already half gone. Flames roaring against the night sky, he slammed the brakes, jumped out, and ran toward the blaze, shouting for help. But there was nothing to save. The roof collapsed with a crash, sparks flying high like angry stars. He could smell burning wood, metal, and memories. Inside that cabin were his father's tools, old photos, books, and the wooden chair his mother used to sit in by the fireplace. Everything was gone. The fire crackled and hissed as if mocking him. His eyes stung not from the smoke, but from the heartbreak. Behind him, through the fence, he heard voices, faint but familiar, his neighbors standing in their yard pretending to be shocked. "Oh my God, what happened?" One of them shouted. Another said, "It must have been lightning, poor guy." The man turned to look at them, their faces pale in the firelight. But their eyes gave them away, too wide, too nervous, too fake. They avoided his gaze as he watched them silently. Firefighters arrived later, spraying water and taking notes. One of them patted his shoulder. "Sorry, sir, looks like it started fast, maybe electrical." The man just nodded, saying nothing, because deep down, he knew, when the fire was finally out, the cabin stood as a pile of blackened rubble, smoke rising like a ghost from its ashes. The firefighters left. The neighbors went back inside, and the night grew quiet again. Only the smell of burnt wood and the faint hiss of cooling embers filled the air. The man stood there until dawn, staring at what used to be his home. His fingers clenched and unclenched as if trying to hold onto something that wasn't there anymore. But his eyes were calm, too calm. Because beneath that calmness was something colder than anger, something sharper than grief. As the first light of morning touched the ruins, he walked slowly toward what used to be the living room. Ashes crunched under his boots. He kicked away a piece of burned wood and saw something small and metallic glinting in the dust. A tiny black object. Half melted but still recognizable. A security camera. He bent down and picked it up, turning it over in his hand. His lips curved into the faintest smile. Years ago, after someone had broken into his cabin, he had installed hidden cameras in every corner, small enough to blend with the walls, each one connected to a hard drive stored in a metal box buried beneath the floorboards. He'd almost forgotten about them. But they hadn't forgotten him. He walked to the side of the cabin where the earth was still intact, kicked at the dirt until he felt the hard surface of the box. Pulling it out carefully, he opened it. Inside was the drive, untouched by the flames. His father's old habit of overbuilding things had saved it. He brushed off the soot, holding it tightly. The wind moved softly through the trees as if whispering something he couldn't quite hear. He looked at the burned ruins one last time and whispered, "You just made my job easier." His voice was low, steady, not full of rage, but quiet purpose. He turned and walked back to his truck, the hard drive clutched in his hand. As he drove away, the morning sun rose over the forest, lighting the smoke that drifted up from what was once his past. But now it wasn't loss he felt. It was focus, the kind of focus that only comes when a man knows he's been wronged and already holds the proof in his hands. The neighbors thought they had erased a memory, but they had only uncovered something far worse. They had revealed the eyes that had been watching them all along, and soon, those eyes would make them see what real fire felt like. The kind that didn't burn wood, but reputations, peace, and pride. The next morning the smoke was still rising from the ruins of the old cabin. The air smelled of wet ashes and burned pine. Birds avoided the area as if the land itself was mourning. The man stood by the blackened remains, his face unreadable. In his hands he held the metal box he had dug out the night before. It was scorched at the edges but still intact. Inside it was the drive that carried years of quiet observation, the hidden eyes of his property. He wiped it gently with a cloth, the edges rough with soot, then placed it inside his truck. As he turned the ignition, his eyes caught movement at the fence. His neighbors, pretending to check their mail, waved awkwardly. "Terrible what happened, huh?" the husband said, trying to sound concerned. "Electrical fault maybe?" The wife added quickly, her voice too light, too fast. He nodded slowly, not answering, just watching them. His silence made them uncomfortable, and they hurried back inside. He drove off down the dirt road, his mind calm but focused. He wasn't thinking about revenge yet. Not the kind that screamed or broke things. No, his thoughts were sharper, colder, built on patience. He reached his small city apartment, a quiet place above a repair shop. He went straight to his desk, plugged the drive into his old computer. The screen flickered to life, folders appeared, each dated, organized perfectly. He clicked the most recent one, the one labeled cabin, night footage. And there it was, the proof he expected but still made his stomach twist. The footage showed the neighbors stumbling through the dark, their laughter slurred, one of them holding a red gasoline can, the other lighting a match. The camera caught their faces clearly, the flames reflecting in their eyes. He watched every frame silently, his jaw tightening slightly when he heard them laugh as the fire grew. "Let's see if he cries over this junk," one of them said between chuckles. Another voice replied, "He'll probably thank us for cleaning it up." The screen froze on their faces, wide with cruel amusement. He sat back in his chair, the quiet hum of the computer filling the room, and whispered, "You just confessed to me." He spent the next few hours copying the files to multiple drives, making backups, one for himself, one hidden online, one mailed anonymously to his lawyer. Years of living quietly had taught him one thing. Patience wasn't weakness, it was preparation. When evening came, he returned to the countryside. Parking his truck near the cabin, he watched their house from the shadows. Laughter. Again, the same as before, the same sound that once made him feel small now only made him certain. He didn't approach, didn't speak, didn't show them what he had. Instead, he walked slowly through the ashes, picking up what little was left. A burned photo frame, half a hammer handle, a piece of charred wood with his father's initials faintly visible. He wrapped them carefully in a cloth and placed them back in the box. As he stood there, the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of their music. His eyes lifted toward their windows, glowing gold in the dark. Inside they danced and drank, unaware of the trap that had already closed around them. Over the next few days he began his quiet investigation. Not through confrontation but through observation. He started digging into their history. The husband, Mark, had been fined 3 times for trespassing years ago. The wife, Julia, had been accused by another neighbor of property damage but settled privately. Their son, Ryan, had a record for reckless driving. The man smiled faintly at the pattern. They were a family that thrived on arrogance and fearlessness, thinking no one could touch them. Now they had touched the wrong man. At night, he sat by his computer reviewing the footage frame by frame, catching small details. A wristwatch, a broken lighter, even the brand of gasoline they used. Every detail mattered. He catalogued everything, labeling files with precision. Soon it wasn't just about proving the fire. It was about building the full picture of who they were. He began talking to other neighbors quietly, asking simple questions. Did you ever have trouble with them? Most answered the same way. Always noise, always trouble, but no one could stop them. He listened, nodded, and thanked them, all the while recording every word. He didn't tell anyone what he was planning. He didn't need to. The truth didn't need noise to work, it only needed time. One evening, as he drove home, his truck lights caught something shiny near the woods. He stopped, stepped out, and found the red gasoline can half buried in the dirt. Half melted but still recognizable. The smell faint but familiar. He picked it up and smiled slightly. You left your fingerprint behind, he whispered. The next day he cleaned it, placed it carefully in a sealed plastic bag, and stored it with the other evidence. His collection was growing, every night, while the neighbors laughed. He built his silent case, brick by brick, truth by truth. What they thought was forgotten was now being written down in detail that would outlast all their lies. One night, as he sat in his dim apartment watching the footage again, he paused at a frame where the flames lit up their faces. They were cheering, their hands raised, proud of what they'd done. He leaned closer to the screen and said softly, "You burned wood, but you also burned your own peace." He sent a short message to his lawyer, no names, no details, just 5 words. Keep everything ready. Almost time. Then he leaned back, staring out the window, the city lights flickering like distant fires. He wasn't angry anymore. He was ready to turn their laughter into silence, and their fun into fear. For now, he waited, like the ashes of the cabin, cold on the surface but hiding heat underneath, waiting for the right wind to burn again. This time not in flames, but in truth, the kind that no one could extinguish. Days turned into weeks, and while the neighbors returned to their noisy routines, the man moved in silence, never confronting, never hinting at what he knew. He visited the burned site every day, pretending to inspect the damage. To anyone watching he looked like a man trying to let go. But behind that calm face he was planning. The land around the cabin was his, legally and completely. No one could stop him from rebuilding. So he began, at first with just small things, clearing the debris, leveling the ground, marking the space where the old cabin once stood. The neighbors laughed when they saw the trucks arrive. His rebuilding that trash heap again. One of them said, "Guess he didn't learn his lesson." The man didn't respond. He just watched them from under his hat, his eyes unreadable, as the workers poured new foundation. The smell of fresh cement filled the air. This time the cabin was different, stronger, not made of cheap wood but solid concrete and steel, windows with reinforced glass, a new roof that wouldn't burn so easily, and everywhere, every corner, every hallway, every post, small black domes were installed, new cameras, dozens of them, each one more advanced than the last. Recording not just movement but sound, heat, and license plates. The neighbors joked that he had turned the cabin into a bunker. What's he planning, a war? They laughed, but their laughter had a nervous edge now. Something in his silence unnerved them. As if he was seeing something they couldn't, he spoke to them politely when they crossed paths, always calm, always smiling. "Afternoon, Mark, how's the business?" he would say, and the man would stammer, "Good, good, just busy, glad to hear it," he'd reply. That calm voice made them uneasy, especially Julia, who swore she sometimes saw him standing near the fence at night, just looking, not saying a word. The new cabin took a month to finish, and when it was done, it didn't look like the old one. It looked modern, sleek, and impenetrable. Inside, the man had built more than just a home. He had built control. Every camera fed into a private server in the basement. All encrypted, all backed up online. He even connected them to motion sensors around the property. This time, not a single inch of land would be unseen. The first night after it was finished, he sat on the porch, sipping coffee, watching the soft lights flicker along the path. From the other side of the fence came laughter again. But this time it felt forced. He could hear the nervous tone. They were trying to act normal, trying to pretend everything was fine. But something had changed, the balance had shifted. He was no longer the quiet neighbor they could mock. Now he was the man they avoided, the one whose eyes they didn't want to meet. Still, they couldn't resist their arrogance. One evening, as he painted the porch, Mark walked over with a fake smile. "Cabin looks great," he said. "Shame about the last one though, must have been hard." The man didn't stop painting, just nodded. "It was," he said quietly. "But the fire helped me see things clearly." Mark chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, sometimes bad things bring good change, right?" The man finally turned. Meeting his eyes, "Funny," he said slowly, "how fire shows what people really are." Mark froze for half a second before forcing a laugh. "Yeah, right, totally," he said, stepping back toward his yard, his smile twitching. That night, the man sat inside the cabin's control room, watching his monitors. The screens showed every angle. The fence, the driveway, even the shadows near the trees. He wasn't watching for protection anymore. He was watching for reaction. Fear changes people, and he wanted to see it unfold. Over the next few days, small things started happening. The neighbors stopped hosting parties. The loud music faded. Julia avoided eye contact whenever she saw him. And their son Ryan drove off more often, coming home late. The man noticed everything, each movement marked, each face caught on camera. He wasn't doing anything yet. But the pressure was building like smoke under a closed door. One night, he walked along the fence line, flashlight in hand, pretending to check the property. From their yard, he heard whispering. "He knows," Julia hissed. "I can feel it, he knows." "You're paranoid," Mark snapped. "There's no proof." "Then why did he rebuild it like that?" she demanded. "Why does he watch us every night?" The man smiled in the dark. Their fear was starting to eat them alive. He didn't need to raise his voice or file a report. The truth he carried was heavier than any weapon. Still, he wasn't done. Inside his office he opened the recovered footage again, clipped a few clear frames of their faces in the firelight, and stored them under a new folder named Confession. Then he printed still shots, each one showing them laughing as the flames rose, and slipped them into an envelope. The next morning, while they were away, he walked up to their porch and left the envelope at the door. No note, no message, just the photos. By evening he saw the curtain move nervously. Someone had found them. Later that night, the lights in their house went out early. No music, no voices, just silence. He sat on his porch, sipping coffee again, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Now you're beginning to understand," he whispered. The fear had finally begun to settle in their bones, and the game had only just started. What they thought was a joke had become a slow unraveling, one that would not stop until they faced what they did. The cabin, once destroyed by their fire, now stood reborn, stronger, brighter. And this time it wasn't watching to protect him. It was watching to judge them, silently, patiently, and completely. The fear in the neighbors' house grew heavier with each passing day. They stopped waving, stopped talking. Even the laughter that once echoed across the fence was gone, replaced by whispers and nervous glances. The man continued his routine as if nothing had changed, tending to his garden, repainting the porch, cleaning his tools. He never mentioned the fire, never hinted at the truth. And that silence was worse than any threat. It crawled under their skin and made them restless. One evening, Mark tried to confront him, walking up to the fence with forced confidence. "Hey, I think we got off on the wrong foot," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "About the fire. That was, well, accidents happen." The man looked up from the soil, wiped his hands, and replied calmly, "Yes, accidents do happen, but some accidents laugh while they burn." Mark froze, his mouth opening slightly. No words came out, and before he could think of something to say, the man added softly, "You should be careful, Mark. Fire doesn't just destroy wood. Sometimes it uncovers things that were supposed to stay hidden." Mark backed away slowly, muttering, Yeah, sure," and hurried back inside. That night, the lights in their house stayed off for hours. The man sat in his new cabin, in front of the monitors, each screen showing a different angle of the neighborhood. His cameras picked up everything, from the faint movement of their curtains to the nervous pacing inside their living room. He didn't need to say a word. The footage was doing the work for him. 2 days later, he uploaded a short clip anonymously to a local news site. The footage showed two shadowy figures laughing as they threw gasoline on a cabin, the fire glowing behind them, their voices distorted but still clear enough to recognize. "Let's see if he cries," one voice said. "He'll never know it was us." The video didn't name them, didn't show addresses, but anyone in town who saw it knew exactly who they were. Within hours, the video spread on social media. People started whispering in grocery stores and gas stations, "Did you see the footage? That's the Hendersons, isn't it? How could they do something like that?" The neighbors became the town's scandal overnight. When the family realized it, panic took over. Mark stormed into the living room shouting, "Who released this?" Julia cried, "It's that man. It has to be." Ryan, their son, kicked a chair over, "We're ruined." Their phones rang non-stop. Reporters, friends, even their boss. Mark's job suspended him pending investigation, and the insurance company that had promised to pay for the cabin loss withdrew their claim, labeling it criminal suspicion. Everything they tried to hide was now burning brighter than the fire they had started. Across the fence, the man stood by his window watching them through the blinds, the glow of their phone screens reflecting off their faces, the panic setting in. But he wasn't done. The next evening, he sent a copy of the full footage directly to the local police, along with a short note that said, "Recovered from security system, date and time included, no signature, no return address." The following week, a police car stopped outside their home, officers knocking on their door. The man watched from his porch, sipping coffee as the officers spoke to them. Julia broke down crying while Mark tried to talk his way out, but the evidence was too clear. Even Ryan's fingerprints matched the melted gasoline can the man had kept all along. They weren't arrested that day, but they were officially under investigation for arson and destruction of property. The town turned cold toward them. People crossed the street to avoid them. Friends stopped visiting. Their mailbox filled with anonymous letters calling them monsters. For the first time, their own fire had turned on them. The man didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He just waited. The revenge wasn't about rage. It was about balance. One night, as rain fell heavy, he stood on his porch watching their lights flicker through the downpour. Mark and Julia were arguing again, loud enough that even the storm couldn't hide their voices. "We should leave this place," she screamed. "We can't. We'll look guilty," he shouted back. The man turned away, walked inside, and checked the footage again. Everything was backed up. Every sound, every word, every tear. He didn't need to hurt them physically. The truth was already doing it. A few days later, another article appeared online. Local family investigated for fire damage after hidden camera evidence emerges. Their names were printed this time, their faces shown, their arrogance stripped away, and while the town turned against them, the man kept living his quiet life. He fixed the fence, planted new trees, and cleaned the area where the ashes of the old cabin still lingered. He even placed a small wooden sign there that read, "From ashes, truth grows." That evening, as he worked, he noticed Mark standing on the other side of the fence again. This time his face pale, eyes hollow. "You've ruined us," he said quietly. "You burned us down." The man looked at him steadily. "No," he said in that same calm tone. "You burned yourselves. I just gave the fire a mirror." And then he turned and walked back inside, leaving Mark standing there under the fading light. The sound of rain beginning again, washing away the last of their pride. Inside the cabin, the man sat down in his chair, the flicker of the monitor lighting his face. He opened the footage one last time, watching the flames rise, hearing their laughter turn into chaos. Then he closed the file and whispered, "Justice doesn't always come from the law. Sometimes it comes from memory." Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, the sound deep and final, like the closing of a chapter that had been waiting too long to end. Weeks passed, and the town had already chosen its villains. The Henderson family became the story everyone whispered about in coffee shops and hardware stores. People crossed the street when they saw them. Kids at school mocked their son, and even the grocery clerk avoided their eyes. What once was arrogance had turned into isolation. Their house, once bright with lights and laughter, now looked like a shadow, curtains always drawn, cars parked crooked, grass uncut. The fire they started had burned more than wood. It had burned their place in the world. Meanwhile, across the fence, the man's cabin stood strong, freshly painted, quiet but alive, the fields around it green again. The smell of new wood and rain blending in the air, every day. He sat on his porch drinking coffee. The same way his father once did, watching the sun rise over the trees. To him, the silence felt clean again, not empty, not angry, just peaceful. But that peace wasn't shared by his neighbors. They were living their punishment every second. Mark lost his job, Julia stopped going into town, and Ryan's friends abandoned him. Their phones stayed off, the mail piled at their door, and the police visits hadn't stopped. The man heard their voices sometimes through the walls, low and tense, blaming each other, fighting over everything. But he never interfered. Revenge was complete, and he didn't need to touch them again. They were destroying themselves exactly as his plan intended. One morning, he found an envelope slipped under his gate. Inside was a handwritten note. The ink smudged from tears. It was from Julia. "We know what we did was unforgivable," she wrote. "But please, my son is losing his mind. My husband can't sleep. We made a stupid mistake, and now it's killing us. Please, if you can forgive us, maybe we can start over." He read it slowly, not once blinking, then folded it neatly and placed it inside the notebook where he had recorded everything, not as evidence, but as a reminder that guilt was the best teacher. That night, under the dim porch light, he saw Julia standing at the fence again, her eyes red and swollen. "Please," she said softly, "just tell us what you want. Money, an apology, anything." He looked at her calmly and replied, "You already gave me what I wanted." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He said quietly, "The truth, that's all I ever needed, and now everyone knows it." She broke down crying, covering her face. "We were drunk. We thought it would be funny. We didn't mean to hurt anyone." He stared at her for a long moment before answering. "Fire doesn't care what you meant, it only cares what you did." Then turned and went inside, leaving her sobbing in the dark. That same night, the rain began again, soft and endless, washing over both houses, and as the thunder rolled, the man sat at his desk, opening the old hard drive one last time. He didn't need to see the footage again, but he did, just once more, not for satisfaction, but closure. He watched the flames rise, the laughter echo, and then fade into silence. He paused on the frame where the first spark lit the wall, and whispered, "That's the moment everything changed." Then he deleted the files, one by one, the past finally gone, only the truth remaining. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, listening to the rain. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, the air clean and cold. He walked to the old spot where the first cabin had burned down, the ground still darker than the rest. From his pocket, he pulled out a small metal tag, one that had survived the fire. Engraved with his father's name, he placed it in the soil and covered it gently. "Now it's over," he said softly, his voice steady. When he stood and turned toward his porch, he saw movement at the fence. Mark stood there, exhausted and hollow. "You've won," he said weakly. "We've lost everything. What are you going to do now?" The man looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to live," he said simply. "Something you should have done instead of playing with fire." Mark nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with regret, then walked away without another word. That night, the man sat on his porch again, sipping his coffee, the moonlight falling softly across the fields, the cabin lights warm behind him. He thought about everything that had happened, every cruel laugh, every lie, every moment of silence that had led to this. Revenge hadn't brought him joy, but it had brought him peace, and peace was worth more than forgiveness. As the wind moved through the trees, he could almost hear his father's voice again, calm and proud. "You did well, son. You didn't fight the fire, you let it burn them out." He smiled faintly, whispering back, "I only showed them the mirror." And with that, he stood, turned off the porch light, and went inside, the cabin door closing softly behind him. Outside, the night was quiet once more. The fence stood tall, dividing two worlds. The man's, filled with calm and truth, and theirs, swallowed by guilt and ruin. In the darkness, justice had already spoken, and the story that began with fire ended with silence.